My name is Professor Bernard Tyrrell. I'm a pharmacist with an MBA, and I'll show you a little bit about my background, just in a one-slide kind of format, to give you an idea of what the journey could be for someone who is a pharmacist, but yet wants to work in the pharmaceutical industry. I think that's important to recognize that pharmacists today can do so much more with their degree. As we all know, most people are exposed to pharmacists when the pharmacist is in a retail setting at a CVS or other community pharmacy. In addition to that, many people recognize pharmacists have a role to play in clinics. They also, of course, in hospitals, academic centers, etc. But the role that I had for many, many years was working in the pharmaceutical industry, using my knowledge that I had gained and experience that I had gained while going to pharmacy school. So what you're seeing essentially is a pictorial diagram of what I've done over the years. And the first you start off with, of course, is with family. So it's a picture of my family when I was much younger, and a picture of me when I was 16. I went to Massachusetts College of Pharmacy in Boston to get my pharmacy degree. And then I started working right away for the industry. So I spent almost 20 years working for a company called Eli Lilly out of Indianapolis. And I had many different roles in that. In fact, I had 10 different jobs in those 20 years. During the evening, I went and got my MBA because I thought that it would help me to have a better idea, a better feel, if you will, for how businesses actually operate. And so I spent half the time at Bryant, half the time at Babson College, both in Boston, getting that degree. After 20 years with Lilly, I left and went on to other companies. I worked for Encore, which is a molecular diagnostic company, and then for Johnson & Johnson, then the Hay Group. And you can see the other companies that are listed along there. And what I think is interesting is, again, with the same background as a pharmacist, you can work for the biopharmaceutical industry, you can work for medical diagnostic companies, you can work for essentially medical device companies. And I think that's what's important to recognize, is there's a variety of companies that need the expertise that pharmacists have. And so one of the things that we also have to recognize is that you continue to change and grow as you're going through your career, and you pick up additional skills as you go along. So as I start off essentially as a sales representative for Eli Lilly and Company, and then got into management, and then over time picked up more and more managerial roles from all these different companies. And I think that's the dynamic that you have, is as you grow, you can actually direct yourself wherever you want to go for all these different companies. So in some companies, I was a sales individual. Other people, I was a sales director. I was also a marketing director. I was a vice president in several different companies. So all those things are possible. And then after about 30 plus years, I decided to get back into academia, and I went back to Boston to Mass College of Pharmacy, where I started teaching some of the things that I do. And I really enjoyed doing that. And more recently, I came out here to the Keck Graduate Institute, and I've been here for over 2 years now. And what I've been doing is trying to practice and help individuals understand the dynamic that pharmacists can have working in the industry. So this is kind of interesting, because most of the time we think of ourselves as, this is obviously Leonardo da Vinci, thinking about, this is the graphic of what a human being is and what a human being does. But in reality, this is what we are. We are our genetic code, and our genetic code changes. Of course, 500 years ago, Leonardo da Vinci did not recognize what our genetic code was, but we do. And one of the things that's really interesting today is the dynamic of our genetic code and our ability to actually impact that genetic code. We are just at the frontier of making that happen, but I can tell you that's something that's coming, and something we actually can take into consideration now as we're developing new products, new medical products for patients. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. One of the things that I'd like to also leave you with is just this impression of, as we improve, the self-improvement is really meant is to try to help us to make sure that we conquer diseases, that we have longer lifespans, that we're more aware of climate change that's going on in our world, and how we're actually supposed to be better caretakers of the earth. And that all takes the kind of technology, drive, and innovation that we try to get here at Keck Graduate Institute. And as you probably know, the Keck Graduate Institute is only a graduate institute. So we have master's degrees, PhDs, and PharmD degrees. And those are the primary degrees that we have. We don't offer undergraduate degrees here at the school. So improvement, innovation, those are the things that we're doing, okay? I also want to set you up now to kind of understand the approach of essentially how a company, a pharmaceutical company or a biopharmaceutical company approach to how you should develop a product. And the first thing you have to do, and there's really 6 steps to these, they're quite self-evident, but these are what all companies follow. The first thing is to start with an unmet medical need. And so there's plenty of references that will tell you in the United States what the medical needs are. And those medical needs have changed over time. Our grandparents used to have the biggest problem they had was infection. And today that's not the biggest problem. In fact, the biggest problem, according to this, of course, is heart disease. So the #1 killer in the United States is essentially heart disease. And there's a number of things that happen. There's hyperlipidemia, which is a problem. There's high blood pressure, which is another. So there's a lot of different activities that happen, and we've come up with a number of compounds that actually work for people that have heart problems. And as you know, Alzheimer's disease is another one where it's a significant problem. And we're looking at inroads and making that happen. So when a company looks at one of those things is heart disease. And then something that I think is quite innovative is Luxturna. So today we're able to use gene therapy for limited blindness. And recently there was a young boy who was 12 years old, who had limited blindness, and at 12 years old was getting blind. He couldn't see. He continued every day. He was losing more sight. So what they did is they of course used this new product, this gene therapy, and the gene therapy was able to impact him. So now that he has almost 20/20 vision again. So in some regards, we've come a long way from willow bark to gene therapy, but that process is understanding the drug development process. And what I really like is this next slide, because this next slide, companies have to follow this process. Now, this is essentially the slide for drug development. And so this is the one that we use for pharmaceutical companies, which starts with pre-discovery. This is where the scientists are working in the labs, trying to better understand for biology, how are things working. And according to the slide, you can see here, it takes years, maybe 3 to 6 years, and thousands of products, essentially compounds, through drug discovery to find the best one. And then we take those, we put those in the preclinical. In preclinical, we put these in animal models to try to think what would they do in humans. And then we come down from that point in time, we come down with just a couple of compounds, maybe 4 or 5, that we put into phase 1. And that phase 1 time is we're trying to understand, okay, so what's the safety, what's the tolerable dose that we should have for this? And outside of things like oncology, we're just looking for that kind of experience in volunteers. And then we start moving a little bit beyond that, and we have phase 2 in a larger number of patients, what the adverse events, drug effects, drug impact that will have. Later on, we move on to phase 3. In phase 3, we have, maybe 5, maybe 10,000 patients that we have. This all takes time. This is all done ethically all across the board. There are all the physicians that are working with the company in order to make sure we do this the right way for the patients, and the patients are fully disclosed of what's happening. Then, of course, we move into, if it works out well, and it has this positive benefit-risk ratio, then we have, the FDA has a review. The FDA looks at all the information we have, and then we say, okay, this is something that should be approved because it has great benefit for patients. And then we go to the commercial area. But the other reason I like this is you can look at this slide and say, well, maybe I'm really interested as a pharmacist in working in the earlier side, the drug discovery side. Well, there'll be a place for you there because there's different science that you can actually, different things you can do in that early science side. If you're more into the clinical trials area, then you can work in clinical trials, working with patients and physicians, because that's actually very positive. And there's big companies that work in this space because, again, those clinical trials sometimes tend to be very large. And there are some trials that may recruit 20,000 patients around the world, and some of the bigger cardiovascular ones. And then, of course, I always worked in the commercial side of the house, so it's how do you communicate the value of this medicine to. So this same type of graph, you could change the heading, and it can be used for people that are working in other areas. If you're working in, for example, in diagnostics, they have to get their products approved by the FDA or cleared by the FDA also. So again, a good slide to look and try to understand the process that we all have to go by. The next thing is, so what does it take to go from an idea and having a problem like cardiovascular disease, trying to find those kind of compounds? And then you also have to think about the organization itself. And so the third step is having this kind of winning strategy. And this is a slide from George Day's RWW screen. So you really just have to ask yourself 3 questions. One of the questions is, how valuable will this product be in the marketplace? Is this for 100 patients or 1,000 patients, or will this be used in 1,000,000 patients? And that's it. So what's the value of this compound? Will it be doable? Do we have the technological feasibility today to make this happen? A few minutes ago, I talked about gene therapy. And if we were standing here 10 years ago, we would not have had we would not be technologically feasible or have that feasibility and actually to get this product and get this product to market. We just didn't have the wherewithal to make that happen. We do today. And so the thing that's interesting is, in 10 years, what will be our technological feasibility for additional activities using genetic tech templates? And the last thing is, do you have the competency to win? And the competency is really about, do you have the talent within your organization to get everything done? So do you have the physicians and the PhDs, the pharmacists? Do you have the people, the managerial expertise to make that happen? So there's lots of different people that have different specialities, if you will, to get a product to the marketplace. So this is a good way to take a look at that and have a better feel for it. The other one is just R&D innovation. And again, there's so much money that is spent by you if you pay taxes, or your parents if they pay taxes, that goes to the federal budget, that goes to the NIH, the National Institute. And what happens with this is they take that money and they send that money out to people that have really good ideas about innovation. And many academic institutions utilize this money to further discoveries that we need to have in order to build that, to drive that R&D innovation. So a very large area right here, people that are very interested in what's beyond where we are today, where is that frontier for developing that information. So again, step 4 is research and development. That's all about innovation. Once you have that innovation, if you go back to the drug discovery slide that I showed a few minutes ago, you also recognize that we have to get these things approved. Our friends are at the FDA and our friends are with the European Medicines Agency because they're paid by us, the taxpayer, in order to protect us. And so it's wonderful to have a group of individuals who are very dedicated to making sure that any new product, any new innovation that comes out is something that is safe and effective. And so they're the ones that are really the ones that are helping us to understand, is this product really that good? Is this product really going to help patients? When we look at innovation, we recognize that people have been innovative for a long time. The question is, will this new medicine, will this new device, will this new diagnostics, will that move us forward? And if the answer is no, then the question is, why would you do that? So the FDA will look at that and say, if you need, for example, there's a class of drugs called beta blockers. We have 10 of them. Why would you come out with another beta blocker? The ones we have today work very well as they are. And probably very little innovation is going to move them forward. But there's other areas where we can spend the time, money, and really have the talent to move these forward. I think that's what's important to recognize. So the people at the FDA, the people in the European Medicines Agencies, the one that take regulatory things in Asia, these are folks that you interact with on a regular basis and saying, here's what my plan of action is. Here's what we would like to do. Here's the clinical trials we would like to run in order to get approval for this product. And essentially, it's a partnership going back and forth with these two. So it's really very helpful to make that happen. Okay. So that's why I call them our friends, because they're there to help safeguard us and to guide us, because they have lots of experience getting many products through the pipeline. Okay. The next thing is the handoff. I worked on the right side of the slide, if you will, because I was always the commercial side of the house. But again, there's always this handoff between those folks that are working in the labs and clinical trials. And once the product's approved by the FDA, then you have to go out to the marketplace. Well, I can tell you this, the marketplace is busy. The marketplace has a lot of competition out there, and it's really hard to get people's attention today. And so it takes time, effort, and using a lot of different methodologies in order to inform people of new drugs that are on the marketplace. Recently, I went to a meeting down in California, Southern California. We had a big discussion about all the new drugs that have come out and what these new drugs are offering. And there are a number of new drugs that are coming out to treat different forms of cancer. There are other drugs that are coming out, there are new antibiotics that, because we're losing some of the battle with resistance against certain kind of bacterial infections. And so new antibiotics are coming out. So when those are passed out and they finish, we get them approved by the FDA, then they're going to commercialize those products. And then it's up to those folks on the commercial side to be able to communicate the value and why these are better than something older, or something perhaps isn't working as well as it used to work, and perhaps maybe because of resistance. So that's kind of the handoff to the commercial organization. And when it gets passed over the commercial organization, there's always the traditional 4 Ps, which is the product, the place, the price, and the promotion. But there's even more than that today because the world has changed. So in order to commercialize, it's not just about putting an ad on TV. There's many different ways of influencing people to say, okay, evaluate this product, find out if it's good or not. There are many advocacy groups which work all the time in order to help people understand the value of these products and whether or not they're good for the people that they're advocating for. So that commercialization part. And as you know, things are not inexpensive, so you have to defend, and rightfully so, defend your price. Why is this product worth this value? You know, think about all the people that have put this together and how risky the business is. So pharmaceuticals are high risk, but they're high reward. But again, many of the products that we start with never make it through. So again, someone has to pay for the price of that, and that's built into that price. Okay. What I want to do is kind of take and switch gears just a little bit and give you a different feel for exploring career options in pharmacy. Now, one of the things that I really like about KGI, and my wife and I moved all the way from Boston over to Southern California, was because KGI has options for PharmDs, which I found are really exciting. Because it's just, in my mind, it's just not good enough graduating from a pharmacy school and say, okay, I'm a pharmacist now what do I do? I think that one of the things that's really helpful is you have a better feel for their certificates, and there are different aspects of what you can do when you're in pharmacy school. And when you get out of pharmacy school, how do we take those skills and modify them to fit you into the marketplace? Okay, and so there's four that we have right here, right now at KGI. And the first one is health information technology. I can tell you right now, in any hospital or hospital system, you can't survive without having an information technology system about where the drugs are being used, which patients are receiving them, being able to bill those appropriately. Also information technology on which new drugs are coming out. So you need to have people that not only are PharmDs, but also have an expertise in health information technology. I'll move a little bit further over. We talked about healthcare management. Someone has to run these large organizations. I remember I was at a conference 2 years ago, and the director of pharmacy at Cleveland Clinic got up and talked about his budget. And because the Cleveland Clinic is a massive, well-known, well-run organization, his budget for drugs for a year was $1 billion. And I was blown away with that one institution, even though it is a large institution, essentially is spending $1 billion on their products, to bring them in every year for all their patients. And so you better believe there has to be a lot of good management expertise to manage a budget that large with that many drugs to that many patients. And so that I thought was really exciting. And here at KGI, you'll be able to understand some of the foundations of how you actually make that happen. I'll go to medication therapy outcomes next. So medication therapy outcomes is a little bit different. And this is the way that a lot of folks use this to figure out, okay, so for this patient, maybe they have type 2 diabetes and they have other kinds of complications. So what medications would work best for them? Recognizing that some medications can interact with each other, and you have to understand what those are as you're working with each patient individually. Okay, so medication therapy outcome is really the forefront of pharmacists working in clinical setting. The area that I've been working in is medical and clinical affairs. Medical and clinical affairs are those areas within pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies or diagnostic companies, which are very interesting because this is the bridge between the research side and the commercial side. So when you talk about who's going to submit all the information on a drug trial to the Food and Drug Administration, it's actually people working in medical and clinical affairs. When you have a problem with a product and you want to talk to someone, it's probably going to be someone in drug information embedded within medical and clinical affairs. So we have found these very 4 certificates that we offer to be very valuable to our students so that when they graduate with their PharmD, they're already formed in that they have a good subspecialty that they're working on. And in addition to the didactic courses that the people are taking for these 4 certificates. I'm also responsible for called experiential education. Experiential education is where you actually go out and you practice this. So these folks will have over 3 months, close to 4 months experience working at a hospital, working in a pharmaceutical company, actually practicing this, working on major projects while they're learning all the rest of their schooling. So this is very valuable. I think you'll have both the didactic and the experiential activity at KGI in order to help you when you launch. And just this past year, our class, we had about 15% of our students ended up working in either as a fellow in a pharmaceutical company or getting hired directly for them. And that's a very large percentage. Most pharmaceutical companies, it's less than 1% of their folks that end up in the industry. So we're quite proud that these certificate programs help our students land very good jobs when they finish school. Okay. So where do they end up working? Here's a quick slide on this. They work in biotechnology companies, gene therapy companies, essentially pharmaceutical companies. That's the place you would most likely think that they would end up. But I can tell you we have our graduates that are working in medical devices and combination products because we're kind of marrying things together. If you think about someone who is a diabetic and needs to take insulin, they also have to know essentially what their blood glucose is. And we now can do that automatically by having a pump attached to that patient so that the pump can actually sense what's going on with the patient's blood glucose level and then give the correct amount of insulin. So it's almost like an artificial pancreas, if you will. And going down here, there's different organizations. Well, I'll put Par Excel here. There's 17,000 people in that organization. All they do is clinical trials. There's also sales organizations and medical organizations that, again, people helping the pharmaceutical industry get to the end of the road of getting the products through the development pipeline. And then, of course, there's always consulting, which I did for a couple of years and found that very, very insightful and actually a lot of fun. But recognizing the people around this table, recognize the people that you'll come in, that some of the physicians, PhD, marketing people, finance people. It takes all these different type of people with all these expertise in order to do well. So one of the things I'll say is that you have to, and I hate the quote, but you have to play nice in the sandbox. All these people have the same goal, is trying to alleviate disease. And so they're all trying to work very hard to make that happen. It's the combined talent of that group, which is get the products through the development pipeline and then get them onto the marketplace so physicians and other prescribers can give them to patients. And it all has to be done very ethically, and that's why I'm so proud to have spent so many years working in the industry. Also recognize, I like this little petri dish, if you will, because recognizing it's a global business. So you don't develop products just for people in the United States or just for Europe. You develop products for people around the entire world, and you may have global impact. And I worked on several launch teams over the years when I was working in the industry. I worked on a product called Prozac for Lilly, human growth hormone or human insulin also for Lilly. I worked for other companies too that essentially when the product is launched, you try to launch it around the world because patients, regardless of where they are in the world, have conditions that they really have to work with. Okay. So I also want to talk about one thing other that's unique about KGI is that because we have a strong tie to the industry, and that doesn't mean that you can come here if you want and you'll have a great education and you'll graduate. You want to go to community pharmacy, that's wonderful. If you want to go to a hospital, that's great. But you also recognize that we want to make you the information available to you so you can go wherever you want to go. And so when I came here a couple of years ago, we started this industry fellowships. And right now we have 9 industry fellowships that we have for our folks. And so let me talk a little bit about the program itself. That a fellowship program is essentially a training program. So you get your education and you progress as a PharmD through the program. You get your education, you get your practical training. And so that means that's experiential education. So as a PharmD student, you'll go to a community setting and you'll actually be there with a pharmacist helping patients out and helping understand that process. You'll also spend time in a hospital. You'll spend a hospital in several different places. You'll be like in the emergency room. You'll be in an acute care setting. You could be in the ICU. There's a number of places that you can go. And what'll happen is, so you'll have all these different experiences as a student, as well as working whatever your certificate expertise is going to be. And then you apply for fellowship. Now, some people, when they graduate, some people want to go into residency and be in the hospital, and that's absolutely fine. Some people want to work on fellowship. I'm very interested in fellowships because I recognize it's a great place to enter into the industry. All right. And so what are these fellowships? They're comprehensive practical training experiences. They get essentially companies sponsored to get these folks in because they're looking for that talent pipeline. And that's what's important because companies are always looking for people that can really know what they're doing or can grow into that job. And our graduates are highly competent in actually a very highly competitive environment, which is the pharmaceutical industry. They demonstrate, by the time they finish, they demonstrate great professional maturity, and they provide this highly specialized service. So one area which is growing quite rapidly is health economics and outcomes research. And so that's about describing the value of our products. And these things are all individually structured, and most of them are 2 years in duration. And across the United States, we're not unique, but across the United States, it's about 500 PharmD fellowships that are going on at any particular time. All right. And the landscape is that, you add value because as people grow, the companies need to have people that are expertise in translating the products that are coming into the marketplace. So whether that's coming out with a new way to explain it to physicians, by having a website, we have our students actually create websites now, landing pages, and they have to be able to, and they put that together. It's like, I want you to be able to look at 3 different people. I want you to look at physicians or prescribers, as if a physician landed on this landing site, or if you had someone who was a patient or someone who was a payer. All these 3 are important to have. So again, we've continued to develop these different tools that are necessary in order to communicate our products. Okay, and the amount of participating fellowships continue to increase annually as companies come out looking for this type of talent. And there's new kind of collaborations and models that are growing in the industry. All right. I just want to give you a quick snapshot of some of the top areas for PharmDs. They entered something called medical affairs. Again, medical affairs is that area between research and development and the commercialization organization. They work in different areas as liaisons. They do medical education, medical communication. They do strategy and pharmacovigilance. And so the largest group of fellows right now is right around 100 today. It's in medical affairs. And then further on the other side of the slide, we have people that work and get expertise in regulatory affairs, as I mentioned before, health economics and outcomes research, and then clinical research and development. There's even some that work in essentially we call clinical marketing. So these are really top-notch kind of jobs within companies where people who have a PharmD background fit very nicely into these areas because of the expertise that they're developing. Okay. And this is kind of an interesting slide because recognize that it's a joint leadership team. So you have people here at KGI who are helping the fellowship program, demonstrating leadership, helping as a preceptor, an academic preceptor, in case at the company you want to be able to put together either a poster or a manuscript, etc. And then the company themselves, the industry sponsor, they can have the same demonstration of leadership. They have good fellowship directors, and they continue working with as academic preceptors as the person goes through their time. I just want to give you a quick snapshot, and you can see these slides again later. But St. John's University is another good example, the pharmacy school, where they provide, they're full-time employees of the university. As a fellow, you're not an employee of the company yet, you're an employee of the university. So we give you all the kind of benefits and salary. And then there's additional things that we do which help you to develop professionally. And so you precept pharmacy students, you do continue education courses, you go to seminars. So again, this is just one good example of an organization, another fellowship program. There's all the things that are necessary to help the development of that individual as they go through their fellowship. I also want to put this slide in because I want you to take and put a hat on as if you were the pharmaceutical industry. So why would a pharmaceutical industry want to have fellows? And the thing that's interesting is that the first bullet point, which is to choose and develop the next generation of leaders from a national pool. So yes, it's very competitive to get in there, but you're getting top talent. And the fellows spend between 85 to 90% of their time at the sponsored company doing the work, for example, in medical affairs or in clinical affairs. Okay, they are employees. For example, ours are employees at KGI. It helps the company because many times they have the money and they have the projects, but they don't have the people. So the fellows help them because the fellows kind of bring it out and say, okay, how do I do this? And the fellows can actually be there. They're not their head count, so that helps them out. They have the money to do the work, and they do good work right away, and they do real work right away. So I think that helps them over that 1 or 2 years during their fellowship program. Okay? The second-year fellows actually precept the first-year fellows, and the reason that that's important is because now they're going to demonstrate both leadership and managerial expertise before they finish their fellowship. Okay? And they also work with students. So one of the skills that's necessary working in pharmaceutical companies, or all these companies, as a matter of fact, is those kind of leadership and managerial abilities. Because someone's going to run these companies, and companies tend to be big, complex, and with a pharmaceutical company, it says by sponsoring fellows, we have a lot of this talent coming through. And when I was back in the East Coast, I had a fellowship program, and at one company, we had actually 26 fellows. So again, a lot of activity, and it really resonated with the company to have people. So it was a lot of good things in there for them. What's important for you is by coming to KGI. So what's in it for you as a PharmD graduate? You have this 2-year training program. When you graduate, you develop these critical skills in a positive, reinforcing environment. People like fellows. They're young. They're the new talent. They've got lots of new ideas. You know, like these folks here, you build this lifelong network of industry fellows. These are all the people you can rely on for the rest of your career. And 70% of all the fellows are hired right into the company. They do their fellowship. And the 30%, the other 30% go someplace else because they have this experience, and that really works out well for them. They defer their loans for 2 years while they're doing the fellowship because you're part of an academic program. And it was interesting because I asked the fellows, you know, what about this academic component, these putting posters together, you know, working with the students. And they just said this experience greatly enhanced my ability to do my job and to accelerate my career. A fellowship program can be something that can really accelerate someone's career because of all the experiences you'll have as a fellow. And I truly believe that that's true. So I know I went through this kind of quickly, but I just want to give you some basic background on what happens when you want to come to KGI and the opportunities that we offer for you. And in addition to that, there's, you have my email address. You're more than welcome to send me any kind of questions. And I'll ask Jason to come back in and see if you have any questions that I can answer because my little question box is not on my screen. Okay? So thank you very much for listening. I certainly appreciate it. We'll start answering any questions you might have.
Can you talk about maybe some KGI graduates who have gone into industry and what they may be doing right now?
Happy to. So one of the things is we've had a couple graduates from our fellowship program, and one of them is, his first name actually has to be Jason also. And Jason has a job working at a company outside of Chicago right now. He's working in medical affairs. And so he's really enjoying it because the therapeutic area is of great interest to him. And he has some family members that he can help out by that knowledge. So that's one place. So Jason ended the job there. Another one of our fellows graduated from the program and ended up as a medical science liaison. So a medical science liaison is someone who works in the industry, and they work with their field base. What the field base means is they don't work at the headquarters, but they actually work out in the field, if you will. So people that work as medical science liaisons are the medical representative of the company, but they're field-based. So the people, if the headquarters is located in California, they may be working in Boston or in Minneapolis, and so they have a territory. It's almost like a sales representative because they have a territory, but again, they're not a salesperson. They have to have a terminal degree, and what I mean by that, they have to either have a master's or PhD, or PharmD, MD, or PhD are the 3 primary degrees that they have, and they're out there to represent the medical side or the medical affairs of the company. And so the other fellow we have is now working at a company who is working as a medical science liaison. So there are many different jobs the individuals can have, and don't think of it if you just landed a job and that's all you're going to do for the rest of your career. Because as I said, when I worked at Eli Lilly and Company for those 20 years, I came in as a sales individual, which was typical back then, even for pharmacists at Lilly. And then over the next 20 years, I had 10 different jobs. And one of them, which I thought was interesting, is I was responsible for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, working out of the London office. And so there are opportunities to go international working for the industry. So I really enjoyed that, had a great time for those 3.5 years. And again, that was something that I never thought about when I entered the industry, but again, new opportunities availed themselves as I went through.
So another question, what ways will KGI expose me to industry during the 4 years? So, in the first year, how can I figure out if industry is for me?
That's a great question. So one of the things that's also unique about KGI is that we have lots of visitors that come to the school. Last year we had over 80 individuals that came to make a presentation. And so you'd have people that came from Genentech and Amgen, BioMarin, other biotechnology companies. And so people come here all the time because of the type of school that we are. Again, we're a graduate school only. And what we're looking for is to say, okay, we want to expose our students to all these different individuals. And it could be talking about genetics, it can be talking about bioprocessing. Again, it's individuals coming here to expose the students. So the students understand, because during their 4 years here, they'll spend time in a community pharmacy or a hospital, or depending upon their certificate. But they're also going to be exposed every year to 80 or 90 different people every year coming in, talking to them about what the industry's like, what the jobs are like. Recently we had the folks that were here from the FDA that came in. The FDA is also a career path for pharmacists, because obviously you need people that are credentialed individuals to be able to evaluate all the products that are coming in. The other thing I'll say is that we have, I think, over 100 student organizations here. And so there's plenty of places for you to go. If you're interested in rare diseases, we have one of the biggest rare disease clubs of all pharmacy schools out here. And that's really exciting, because there's about 7,000 rare diseases, and there's a lot of progress that's going on. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can join that club and be exposed to, again, different types of speakers and different ideas about how you could create a career within that area. And so during your 4 years, you'll be exposed to lots of different things, both didactically, experientially, but also through the clubs we have and all the speakers that we have coming here. And there are many times we'll go out actually to the companies themselves, and we'll have tours of the company so people can actually see what it's like if you wanted to work in one of those companies.
Great. So another question, what measures do pharmaceutical companies ensure that their projects are ethical?
Well, one of the things we do many times, especially, for example, with clinical trials. So in clinical trials, you'll actually have an outside advisory board. So we use the term KOL all the time. It's a key opinion leader. So if we're developing a product for breast cancer, one of the things the company will go out and they'll work with some of the top breast cancer experts in the world. They'll work for people at places that are, for example, at City of Hope or Dana-Farber Cancer Institute or the Mayo Clinic. These are just names of big, highly credible academic centers in the United States. And so these individuals will be on a panel. And as the company is developing the clinical trials, they give this panel will take and they'll go through everything. And I mean, they go through everything. They want to make sure that we're informing the patient, that we're doing the right thing, we're doing the right laboratory tests, we're giving the right kind of dose, again, that we're following up with these patients all the time. So we use these key opinion leaders essentially as a gauge to make sure that the pharmaceutical company is doing the right thing for patients that are on the medicine all the time. And that's how we know we're being ethical, because these are all physicians. These are all physicians that essentially, they're the top physicians in the country, and they work for very large, credible organizations that we believe. And this is something I think is important. So before we ever go to finish or even start the trial, not only do we take and go to these physicians, but we also bring all this information. And by law, we have to bring it to the FDA. And so the FDA also looks at this and says, okay, are you doing all the right things? Are you testing? Are you informing the patients and the physicians about this? So that's how we know that we're doing the right ethical things, because not only are we using external experts, we're also going by the FDA. And those are the two bodies that we use in the United States. And overseas, the same thing. We use European experts for Europe, as well as the European medicines agencies. And so that's what keeps us very ethical in the things that we're doing. And so we know we're doing the right things.
How do companies go about reaching out to underrepresented and or low income communities?
Okay, that's a great question, because one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that medicines are available to all. And so if you think about recruiting technologies, many times to recruit patients in clinical trials, you get a representative sample from essentially from people that are very well represented. You know, I happen to be of Northern European extraction. And so you're right, in those clinical trials, you go to big medical centers, but sometimes you're right, there are other populations, other minority populations that are not well represented. So the way we run the clinical trials is we actually go to those places. So you go to lower socioeconomic areas, you go to populations that are not as well represented. And remember, there's one of the slides I showed you, which was a global slide. And I can tell you, one of the things that really works out well is that we can now go, for example, to Asia. We can go to different parts of Europe. We can go to Africa, South America. So we get all different types of populations. And now we're getting a much better take on what it is that for these medicines. You also recognize that we also have the blessing, if you will, of having genetics. So there are some products that I've worked on in my career where we had different takes because of the different genes. Let me give you a real example. Orissa was a product that we had in development for lung cancer. And we did a large global trial. And we had patients from the United States, Europe, and Asia. The drug, and we had 3 large cohorts because there were about 500 to 800 patients in each one of these different areas. In Asia, this drug was a home run hit. It did fantastic in Asia. Patients saw their tumors just kind of melt away. In Europe, it was kind of a little bit more mixed bag. It wasn't as strong a reaction. And in the United States, it wasn't like a reaction at all. And so we're really kind of puzzled by what's going on here. But now because we can now understand the genes better, we recognize that with Asian patients, these patients actually responded much better to the drug than people of European or American. It has such a mixed melting pot, if you will. And so we're reaching out to all populations. And the thing is that if you look at diversity, recognizing that many people have mixed heritage, by looking into the genes of people, we can actually help identify patients much more rapidly. And recently, there's been a number of drugs which have been approved by the FDA, but in order to get those drugs, especially for rare diseases, you have to have a genetic test to make sure you're going to respond to those drugs. So I think we reach into those populations, both the United States and other areas, because I think that we're looking to make sure we get the right patient on the right medicine at the right time. And through the advance of genetics, we'll be able to do that a lot better than we have in the past.
All right, so it looks like there's no more questions. So again, thank you, Dean Tyrrell, for speaking with us this evening. And thank you all for logging on and participating. Feel free to reach out to either Dean Tyrrell or admissions using the contact information on this slide. And we look forward to hearing from you guys and interacting with you all in the future. So thank you again for participating and enjoy the rest of your evening.